English translation. 377th Contact, Part 1. Saturday, 12th February, 2005, 15:11 hours.
Good, Ptah, my friend, that you have already come. Greetings. Our work last night took a little long, because I did not find my way to bed until Eva got up again. She had to get up early because she and Atlant flew to Spain with Selena for her therapy.
Yes, you already mentioned last night that the three of them have to go to Spain. It is also true that it got late last night, but we did a decent job in the 4 hours.
6 hours, Ptah, because there were 2 hours of proofreading with Bernadette before we met here in the office.
Of course, but I was only talking about the time we spent on the group members' articles that we wanted. But let us continue the work now. Did you receive all the articles?
Yes, there are now altogether 10 articles.
Then let us begin, because we will need a few more hours to work through everything.
Well, that is done, because that was the last article. Man, it is already after 22 years.
The work is more than what I expected. Excuse me, my friend, I am deeply touched.
It is okay, dear friend.
All the works they are very deeply touching. What is expressed by all the words in the works, that, my friend Edward, is much more than I ever expected. It shows thoughts and stirrings of the group members, which really exceed all expectations, which I could not have fathomed in them, because they are of such a private nature that our directives forbid an exploration of them. It touches me very much, excuse me.
It is okay, Ptah. Everyone was happy to do it, and the others who did not write anything. Either they did not find the time or they are very unaccustomed to writing. But how I see it, they too would have written in the same frame. But since they could not do that, the other members, who have the writing skills or had the time, did the work for them. So I think that this work here does not only correspond to some group members, but is actually a complete group work.
I agree with that. It is an honorable and dignified work that has been done, for which it is to be assumed that it will be of great benefit. For everything, I want to thank all group members deeply, not only in my own name, but also in the name of all our spiritual leadership.
The position of Billy Eduard Albert Meier in the FIGU and among the core group members. His type of teaching. His behavior towards the core group members, as well as Billy as a human being and herald of the truth from the point of view of the core group of 49 by Hans-Georg Lanzendorfer, Switzerland.
There is no doubt that the human beings of this planet Earth Terra are living in a unique epoch of their history, without, however, being even remotely aware of this fact. Blinded by false philosophies, esoteric false teachings, cult religions and the mammon of their materialistically oriented way of life, they are unable to recognize the presence and the inestimable uniqueness of the true prophet of the modern age, Billy Eduard Albert Meier. Billy Eduard Albert Meier. We live in an information age. There is hardly a spot of Earth left on this planet where the mass media have not publicized his presence through TV radio broadcasts, through the internet, or a multitude of newspaper reports and articles in the course of the past 30 years. But Earth humans have learned to perfect their consciousness blindness to the truth with their eyes open. Thus, the knowledge and insights into his work, as well as into his valuable teachings in the 20th century and at the crossed threshold to the third millennium, remained reserved only for a small circle of a few thousand earthlings. Therefore, the unfolding of the fruits of consciousness of his work will still take many centuries. This fact, however, was already predicted millennia ago, whereby it was also pointed out that the prophet of the modern era, the guardian of the treasure, would begin his great mission in the land of peace, called Elvet, with the teaching and instruction of the human beings in small groups. With his birth on the 3rd of February 1937 in Bulak, Switzerland, a great turning point in the history of the earth was initiated, largely unnoticed by earthly humanity. The silent revolution of the truth had begun. Innumerable supposed wise men, alleged knowers, male and female wheelers and dealers and prophets, as well as prophetesses of their own grace and self-proclaimed UFO contactors, are now wandering over our planet with drum and trumpet. In contrast to all the horrendous charlatanry and the contradictory, irrational, and false teachings of this sector on this planet, the statements and teachings of Billy Edward Albert Meier captivate through their high quality and logic. His spiritual teaching GL shine through their clarity, comprehensibility, creation-relatedness, and comprehensibility. It knows neither idolatry nor personality cults, demands neither the worship of gods nor human beings. This alone makes it a revolutionary novelty on this planet. Neither Billy nor our extraterrestrial friends and teachers make any promises of salvation, know neither class distinctions nor classifications of FIGU members, and their teachings are based on the equal value, equal status, and equality of all human beings. In ufology, the real truth and the cooperation of Billy Edward Albert Meier with his extraterrestrial friends is proven by a multitude of real photographs and diverse evidence of extraordinary significance, sharpness, and clarity, in addition to the well over 120 witnesses regarding observations and the photographing of Pleiaren spaceships, regarding very special experiences in connection with extraterrestrials and their technology, as well as regarding Billy's contacts with the Pleiaren. With these facts, Billy Edward Albert Meier is not at all convenient for many human beings, institutions, and organizations, such as the churches, cult associations, and government organizations in this world. On the one hand, he is criticized by cult religious, sectarian, and esoteric circles regarding his teachings. On the other hand, he is unjustifiably accused of fraud, swindle, and lies from ufological circles. Nevertheless, Billy has been able to stand up to all hostility and criticism for the past 60 years, in contrast to many others who claim to be in contact with extraterrestrials, spirits, etc., only to have their lies exposed and themselves exposed as frauds. Since the founding of the FIGU Association in 1975, Billy Edward Albert Meier has to this day found a considerable number of sensible human beings who actively support his mission and task in various groups as tireless male and female comrades in arms. Since the year 1942, Billy Edward Albert Meier is and has been tirelessly active in some kind and wise for his instructive task and mission. The very fact of his decades of persistence is worthy of closer study and unprejudiced examination of his case. Not a single human being on this earth would be capable of surviving and sustaining a lie and fraud for over 6 decades without damage. Not even Billy Edward Albert Meier. The genius required for such a prank would probably be unsurpassed in its magnitude. The prerequisite would have been that Billy, according to the ideas of his opponents, would have had to coordinate the facts of a planned fraud already as a 5-year-old boy for the next more than 60 years in the highest precision for the presentation of evidence. Countless human beings, helpers and assistants, as well as hundreds of his encounters and witnesses, would have had to be perfectly manipulated or silenced by him in the past and until today, and that would be and is simply an impossibility on this scale. Sooner or later, the real truth always breaks into the light, just as the small seed of a tree is able to break forth between rock and stone with irrepressible force. The conscience of a human being cannot be shut down without limits and without time for a deliberate lie or for profit-seeking and fraudulent machinations. The psyche of the human beings concerned would sooner or later suffer massive damage as a result. Thus, history has also shown time and again that such oriented and manipulative human beings were one day abandoned by the power to maintain their trickery, lies and deceit, and ended in disgrace, ignominy, and shame. In the case of Billy Edward Albert Meier, however, it is exactly the opposite. The more time progresses, the more precisely the many evidences join together to form a great mesh of the real truth and his sincerity, proving more and more that his statements and explanations correspond to the truth. The fulfillment of the prophecies he has brought within the period from the 28th of January 1975 to the present day, as well as the precise fulfillment of all the hundreds of predictions of his extraterrestrial friends and of himself, speak such a clear language that this alone removes all doubt. Never before in the history of humankind has there been a herald who has worked on such a large scale as Billy, who never makes a fuss about himself but only puts the teaching of the truth and all his help for it in the foreground. In contrast to the many male and female false teachers and irrational teachers of the planet Terra, Earth, Billy Edward Albert Meier does not place his own personality, but the teaching spiritual teaching, aka creation energy teaching as such, in the center of his work and teachings. Truly searching, inquiring, and honest human beings always find an open ear with him and receive reliable answers to clear questions. In his teachings, indications and advice lies hidden a great measure of responsibility towards fellow human beings and supplicants. He is always very careful not to burden the human beings with unnecessary things that could do more harm than good to their psyche and consciousness as a result of overload. In his teachings, Billy has the great ability to recognize the state of development and consciousness of a human being in order to convey appropriate and comprehensible answers to him or her. The manner of his teachings and advice are practically comprehensible. They are not theoretical intellectual constructs or fantasy constructs, but they are oriented towards everyday life, and they are explained by him for better understanding with examples of everyday life or through comprehensible parables. He attaches great importance to the protection of personal secrets as well as to the private affairs of those seeking advice. For example, it happens that he receives visits from those seeking advice in the Simya Se Silver Star Center without this being noticed by the other residents. The circles of antagonists accuse him of closing himself off from the public, or of being kept behind walls of secrecy and inaccessibility by the members of the Figu Association. It is no secret that Billy Edward Albert Meier attaches great importance to his privacy, which he is also concerned about for every other human being. He knows only too well that too much openness opens the door to adoration of his personality, which must be avoided at all costs, and furthermore, he is not at all comfortable with flattery in any wise. Nevertheless, he keeps ways and means open for every human being honestly seeking his advice to reach him at any time of the day or night. The nature of his teachings is based on the principle of self-knowledge, the human being's own searching and researching and their own thought work. Billy is a very good observer and judge of character. Due to this fact, he is able to recognize the learning goals, character traits, efforts, or problems and difficulties of human beings very quickly. However, far be it from him to interfere directly and unasked in the private affairs of Figu members. Just as the Pleiaren and the members of the Federation are by and large bound by their prime directive of non-interference, Billy also adheres to this prime directive in small and large ways. He also avoids direct interference when he recognizes that those concerned are struggling with major problems and difficulties. Only then, when he is asked or when the situation urgently requires it, does he speak up and give advice. So it is also only when a certain need for action is recognized from his point of view that it can happen that he initiates a certain indirect evolutionary help and gives the person concerned a leg up through specific questions or impulses, whereby he always preserves the privacy of the one next to him and does not put him or her in distress. If someone does not want to talk about his or her worries, grief, or problem, Billy leaves him or her alone, but is nevertheless always ready to have a clarifying conversation and to help with advice and action if it is then still desired. The direct action for improvement or the effective remedy of personal problems, however, is ultimately in the hands of the persons concerned themselves, be they members of FIGU or those seeking advice from all over the world. It is not uncommon for FIGU members to be preoccupied in their thoughts with things that are being dealt with by Billy Edward Albert Meier at the same time in the new spiritual teaching letters, but without informing the members about it. Occasionally, the aura of the center seems to be saturated with current topics from spiritual science. Often these topics are then unconsciously taken up by the FIGU members, in order to then discuss relevant facts in detail with Billy at the next meetings. Often, as if out of the blue, he brings up some facts for conversation, perhaps because he is writing something about them, or because he thinks the time is correct to talk about them. This often results in the interesting fact that days, a few weeks, 2, 3 or 4 months, or even years later, television, newspapers, journals, and science also take up the same topic, report on it in detail, and confirm his statements and explanations. And this often is in regard to things and facts about which nothing is yet known generally and officially by the sciences, etc. Whoever seeks advice from Billy Edward Albert Meier should also have the necessary courage for the straightforwardness of his answers. He is not one of those human beings who glosses over the truth to those seeking advice and leaves them with a false self-image. His teachings and his words are of an honest nature and marked by reverence for his fellow human being. This respect and responsibility is palpable even when it becomes necessary for him to point out to his counterpart his or her weaknesses, shortcomings or faults without hurting the human being in the process, for truth does not speak with tender but with harsh words. Nevertheless, Billy Edward Albert Meier does not claim that his teachings and advice will be accepted uncritically or taken on board without examination. Self-responsibility, equality, and the equal status of all human beings also demand of him as a teacher and admonishing friend that he accept the freedom of his fellow human beings to have their own opinion, even when the views and opinions of the seeker do not coincide with his own. And in Billy's words, the human being's will is his or her kingdom. He also teaches that a human being must never simply believe anything, but must seek the truth within himself or herself. So also in relation to him, no one should simply believe anything, but thoroughly clarify all the facts that arise through rationality, understanding, and logic, in order to find the effective truth within oneself, through one's own contemplation, through one's own deliberations, cognitions, and through one's own inner and outer experiences, adventures, and through one's own counsels. Billy Edward Albert Meier does not celebrate mass gatherings. The success of his teachings lies in teaching only in small groups, as explained in the ancient prophecy. Thereby, only those honest, searching and researching human beings will take upon themselves the effort of a demanding collaboration, as well as the necessary self-discipline to confront themselves with the teachings of Billy Edgeworth Albert Meier and Figu, who are prepared to derive valuable benefits from them for life and for the evolution. This, however, will only ever be peculiar to human beings who have recognized the true secret of their existence and their task. That is why there are only a few thousand human beings on this earth who learn in small groups and know about the importance of thoroughness in the study of the spiritual teaching, creation energy teaching. Billy is a patient teacher who, without batting an eyelid and with stoic calm, is willing to repeat endlessly the obscurities and misunderstandings. These repetitions continue until ambiguities are clarified, open questions are eliminated, or everything is completely understood by everyone. This is particularly evident when the core group meets to study spiritual teachings. When new works and articles by Billy Edgeworth Albert Meier are read, and these readings are repeatedly interrupted by the questions of the core group members. His behavior towards the core group and passive members of Figu is characterized by the awareness of equal value, equality, and equal rights. These values of the Figu have their validity in everyday life, in the matters of the Figu's rules of order, and in all areas of human existence. With his great knowledge and wisdom, Billy is thousands of years ahead of Earth humans, and yet this unimaginable difference is not felt in any negative kind and wise in one's daily dealings with this man. He has no need to distinguish himself in any kind and wise before the human beings in general, the Figu passive members, or before the members of the core group of the 49, or to boast about his knowledge. His demeanor is neither arrogant nor condescending. Lack of understanding, clumsiness or clumsy grasp of facts, as well as the attacks of the antagonists and his erring friends, are not acknowledged by him with arrogance or impatience. Rather, if necessary, clear and open language is the sword in his hand. If it is a matter of handling any work of which he has manifold knowledge and skills, then he can also be very patiently instructive there, in theory and practice. In case of ambiguities or misunderstandings, he is always patiently trying to put his teachings and explanations into other words, in order to make his statements and the teachings more understandable for all members and fellow human beings. His language is unusually varied in this respect, and in fact it does not occur that he cannot explain something with his large vocabulary. If he has no knowledge of something, he does not try to give a flimsy explanation, but simply says that he has no idea of the corresponding matter, and so cannot give an explanation. In fact, he does not feel too big to do so. In relation to the rules of order and in dealing with them, he is very strict within the Figu. Likewise, with the correct reproduction of the teaching of the true facts and incidents. He does not tolerate any misinterpretation or falsification of the doctrine. It must be reproduced absolutely true to meaning, just as quotations must also be true to the letter. As a personal note, I would like to say that in none of my traditional professions, such as radio, TV, electronics, bookbinding, or social pedagogy, etc., have I been so much encouraged to be pedantic and meticulously correct and orderly as in the Figu. Despite his very strict thoroughness, Billy Edgeworth Albert Meier is quite fair in his demands on the core group members. Decisions of the core group of 49 are governed in Figu by a unity decision of the group. Therefore, Billy casts a very special eye on the correct observance of the decisions. Every member of Figu has the opportunity to make proposals of any kind at the monthly general meetings. The group resolutions are also absolutely binding for the leader of the Figu, Billy Edgeworth Albert Meier, and cannot simply be revoked by him against the will of the group. However, It is possible for him to make counterproposals if he sees the development of the association endangered by an unreasonable decision. Time and evolution take their course and bring constant transformations and changes. According to these creational laws, the Figu is a dynamic entity that in certain respects must constantly adapt to new situations and circumstances, and Billy is aware of this. In this respect, he is open to innovations and also knows how to promote the personal development of the members or to make things easier for them. This also does not go unnoticed by the extraterrestrials working with him, who occasionally participate in improvements and new developments of processes in Figu with technological means according to his interventions. The functioning and advancement of Figu and its members is regulated by clear and sometimes strict rules of order, in which each member has to fulfill certain tasks and association duties. Billy knows how to use the personal skills, talents, and abilities of each individual member efficiently and for the benefit of the Figu community. However, even as the leader of Figu, he does not have the right to dispose of the members according to his will or dictatorially. Each individual Figu member has the right to determine and decide for himself or herself on the use of his or her skills and his or her field of activity. The areas of responsibility of the members are documented in a Figu handbook. The dissemination of the true truth and the far-reaching teaching require a high standard of quality from all members. Therefore, Billy Edward Albert Meier's demands on the group are also very high in these matters. However, his correct dealings and clear attitude towards Figu and the members enables each individual member to contribute to the quality standard of Figu to the best of his or her ability and in a voluntary manner. The pace of work in Figu is generally high. The members are often admonished by Billy to hurry, and just as with himself, there can also be nighttime assignments for the members. Nevertheless, the very great creative power of Figu is characterized by a certain hurried leisureliness, which is also influenced by Billy Edward Albert Meier, through his creative calm and forward-looking composure. Of course, he also has understanding for creative breaks and personal rest periods of Figu members. He is well aware that the core group members, in addition to their professional obligations and in the fulfillment of their self-duties, invest their best skills and assets during their free time to the common goals of Figu. Although he himself works continuously on the teaching letters, on any writings or on the upkeep of the center, he neither exerts any coercion nor evokes any feelings of guilt. Nor does he exert any excessive work pressure on the core group members. He himself works 7 days a week and every night until the early hours of the morning. The long-standing and successful interaction between him and the core group members of Figu is also based on a friendship of mutual learning, in which the strict and dutiful work is balanced with shared amusements, humor, or festivities. And even though Billy always sees to it that everything goes ahead, there is always time for instructive or private, as well as for advice-giving conversations, in which it always proves that he is both a brother and friend to everyone, as well as a helpful and understanding, as well as loving father. So there is also a great connection of consciousness and feeling between the core group members and Billy Edward Albert Meier in the achievement of a common and great goal for this planet. So between the core group members and Billy, there is also developed a feeling of great connection and trust, upon which stand the pillars of the high virtues of love, peace and harmony, freedom, equality, equity, and a sense of responsibility. Without upholding these important principles, members could not ensure cooperation with Billy Edward Albert Meier. The trust of each member is based on years of experiencing the integrity of Billy E. A. Meier. In the same manner that Billy appreciates not being revered as a guru, saint, or superhuman by the members of Phi Gu, the members appreciate his open personality and his constant fight against a cult of personality. Without a doubt, he is highly respected in the Phi Gu Association and by the core group of the 49 as a wise teacher and wise counselor. As a result, he can look back on and count on many long-standing co-workers who have recognized and experienced him as a true herald through countless personal experiences. But they also experience him as an ordinary human being who knows very well how to distinguish between the concerns of Phi Gu and private and personal matters. They have also come to know him as a human being who occasionally makes mistakes and is also able to admit them unapologetically. Apologies are not alien to Billy either, and on the other hand, the core group members can also be sure that they will not be torn to pieces by him because of any mistakes or negligence. He is extremely patient, and over again he gives everyone new chances to correct mistakes. And in fact, it can even take years with him in this regard until he finally puts his foot down. He is very forgiving and also exercises justice when malicious elements slanderously make other claims and put lies into the world. Truthfully, he is neither a dictator nor a guru, for such behavior does not suit him. It is no secret that we live in very expensive times. The upkeep of the Sim Ya-se Silver Star Center consumes a considerable amount of money. According to the bylaws, these expenses are covered by various revenues and mostly by core group contributions, with a smaller part also being contributed by the passive members. Contrary to all the malicious slander, Billy is in no eyes a profiteer from these contributions, for in truth, he lives only from his not exactly large old age pension. It is to Billy's credit that he shows great understanding for the financial situation of the members. He is not involved in setting the membership fees, but only exercises an administrative function over them. In terms of membership fees, he therefore has no function, and so, in this matter too, the members are not put under pressure either by Billy, the Phi Gu Association, or by the extraterrestrials. And if there are bottlenecks and the necessary financial means are lacking, then Billy also feels included in the equivalence in this respect. So he often participates in the maintenance of the center, etc., with his own meager financial means. Contrary to the blind accusations of his many antagonists of making millions from the Phi Gu, the contacts as well as the visual material and the spiritual teaching, etc., this claim corresponds to a ridiculous slander behind which only envy, hatred, jealousy, lies, and malice are hidden. Through all that Phi Gu has achieved worldwide, however, the core group members cannot hide a certain pride, and the fact that all Phi Gu members are allowed to work together with a true prophet who passes on his books and writings to interested human beings at cost price or often completely free of charge makes them happy and joyful. And many a core group member wishes to be able to grasp and recognize the creational connections and the profound connections of Phi Gu with the extraterrestrial friends, with the human rationality at the sessions with Billy, the true prophet of modern times, if also only for a split second. Then, when the aura of indescribable uniqueness and incomprehensibility is in the room and also in my consciousness, only the spark of an inkling blooms. What it means to be able to participate in this universe-wide unique project of the Phi Gu, then happiness laughs in me, whereby love, joy, and harmony flow through me. For we bring the teaching of the truth of the creation and its all-time laws and recommendations, but we do not claim to be omniscient or that our teaching is all-time, for through the evolution of human beings, all of the cognitions, the knowledge and the ability, as well as wisdom and love, grows Consequently, the state of truth and knowledge expands more and more, whereby the knowledge and ability, the understanding and grasping, as well as the wisdom and love and the vision into all that is creational, expands more and more, never rests and goes on infinitely. Quote Billy.
Billy's position in FIGU and among core group members by Bridget Keller, Switzerland.
Outside people who do not know Billy could be mistaken by what I am about to say. That we are all in bondage to Billy, that he is our guru and leader, and that we are so lulled into our little FIGU world that we blindly follow him and no longer have any opinion of our own. This error could not be more blatant in relation to reality. Because Billy is how he is, we have the greatest respect and love for him, and we feel it is a privilege to know him and to be able to walk a long way with him. His remarkable greatness lies in the fact that he holds back his greatness, his gigantic knowledge, and his position with such modesty that it is precisely in this that his real greatness comes to the fore and touches us all deeply, whether we like it or not, and makes us simply love and honor him as a prophet, wise teacher, fatherly friend, wise counselor, and mischievous like-minded person. The disregard he receives from the great and respected bunch of honorable and dishonorable citizens of the world alternately produces in us the whole gamut from a pitying shrug of the shoulders to impotent white heat. Billy as a prophet, Billy as the bearer of knowledge of the past and future, Billy as the expert in all-embracing love and deep understanding of every creature, Billy as the prototype of modesty and simplicity, Billy as an articulate and eloquent master, Billy who does not allow himself to encroach on the private sphere or the formation of opinions of his disciples, Billy who urges us to think in independence and to question and examine everything, Billy who teaches and exemplifies wisdom and knowledge, whose patience truly knows no bounds, who is active in creational, neutral positive involvement day and night in seclusion, who stands by us with an open ear and with advice and action at all times. He is the human being whom we hold in high esteem and love, and for whose defense against denigration no price is too high for us. And despite all this, in our life together in the FIGU, he is one of us. We live together with him as human beings among human beings, which he also is. And because he is a special human being, he paves and shows us the way to the creation, as a mediator, as a teacher, as a comrade in arms, and as a role model. Our dealings with him are so normal, natural, and informal that his opponents, if they could gain a little insight, would turn away in shame. Billy's unswerving will to fulfill his mission, the mission of all of us, brought us, the members of FIGU, to where we are today. All the bad defeats and attacks, all the low blows in mission-related and private form, did not let him deviate one iota from his path. This encourages and strengthens us, who are far from being as strong and steadfast, to also put away our defeats, to overcome our weaknesses, with more or less success. It encourages us to fight and to persevere, whatever comes. From time to time, we are asked why Billy in particular should have contact with extraterrestrials, and why only he. This question is akin to a man asking a woman why only she could give birth to a child and not him. For us, who have a sufficiently deep insight into all interrelationships not to be plagued by doubts, this is only the logical consequence of his billion-year-old destiny and mission. We Earth humans tend to excel when we think we are ahead of the others. We would not be up to such a contact. This circumstance alone would be a contraindication. If you then consider how much shame you have to take upon yourself to publicly admit to having contact with extraterrestrials, then it stops anyway. For Billy, megalomania is a foreign word, and the steadfastness with which he has withstood all attacks and also all attempts on his life for all these many years like a rock in the surf is far more than even an Earth human being would be capable of bearing. The very thought of it makes us capitulate, and we can simply be glad not to be in his shoes. Envy and resentment are completely out of place there. The only thing that is incumbent upon us as citizens of the earth is deep gratitude towards Billy and the effort to support him in his difficult mission by taking our lives responsibly into our own hands and cooperating so that peace and freedom will one day outshine all unpleasantness on our planet in the distant future.
The position of women in Figu equivalence. Equality and equal rights are supreme principles of the Figu Association, as well as the spiritual teaching, Creation Energy Teaching, by Hans-Georg Lanzendorfer, Switzerland.
It is a very evil, bad habit of men on this and other worlds to regard members of the female sex as their personal property, as subjects, inferior, or as second-class human beings. This is an indescribable disrespect and terrible disregard for respectable women. Women are the living proof of strength, power, patience, endurance, frugality, etc. It is through them that new life is created. It is the women who endure months-long restrictions from pregnancy and often unspeakable pain in the birth of a new human life. Through this willingness, the woman enables the creative, tiny fragment of spirit form to reincarnate into a new human body. This is an indescribably majestic and creational act of supreme evolution, in which ultimately also rests a meaning of life. Mothers are of inestimable value in the cycle of becoming and passing away, of birth and life, from dying to death life in infinite sequence. This very special task of the female sex is an indescribable supreme achievement that could never be evaluated by any human standards or rewarded by material values. As bearers, women make possible the evolution of the creation for its own perfection, which is fulfilled with the help of human beings and their consciousness-based and spiritual evolution. It lies in the nature of human beings that women are absolutely equal to the male sex in every respect. Without the consciousness-based, psychic and physical evolutionary support of women, men would be helplessly lost and threatened with extinction. This circumstance is hidden in the quintessence of the spiritual teaching of the prophet Billy Edward Albert Meier, and is an essential part of the thinking, feeling and consciousness of the Figu members. Another bad habit of the men of different cultures is also to degrade women to the sum of their sexual charms and to banish them as worthless in case of childlessness. Such, as well as innumerable other misogynistic excesses, are combated by the members of Figu in their publications, as well as by Billy in the spiritual teaching, Creation Energy Teaching, and his writings. Man and woman equally bear the high values of self-responsibility and the fulfillment of their evolutionary purpose of existence, as these values were placed by creation in the destiny of the being form Omedam. Women and men are Omedam as equal human beings. As learners and law fulfillers in the creation, they are neutral and without any division or subdivision into female or male. The human beings of both sexes fulfill the tasks of consciousness-based, psychic and spiritual evolution. In equality and according to the creational order and condition of their sex, they participate in procreation and in the psychic and consciousness-based preservation of the human species. Their equal union is a perfect act of creation for the creation of new fleshly bodies. The balancing of their psychic and consciousness-based potencies, and thereby serves the preservation and evolution of human life, and thus ultimately the creation itself. This evolutionary task and creational purpose of human life forms finds its fulfillment in marriage. A marriage-like community of life, a partnership or a friendship, which is of course based on the equal value and equality of all participants. The equivalence, equality of rights and equity are also the basis of a shared approach to everyday life and living, of raising offspring and caring for families together, as well as of the psyche, love, and consciousness of human beings. Equality and equal value, respect and esteem for each other also form the basic attitude of the female and male members of Phi Gu for living together and working together in the Sim Ya Se Silver Star Center in Hinterschmidruti. However, the knowledge of the equal value of men and women does not exclude conflicts among the members in the Phi Gu either, which is why all members still have a lot to learn in this regard, for which Billy's teaching and work are very helpful. Where human beings live and work together, disagreements and differences inevitably arise. Dealing with otherness, the opposite sex, foreign views, or other opinions is active learning and thus evolution. The greatness of true human beings is also shown in their culture of dispute and conflict. So also the members of both sexes in the Phi Gu are not immune to confrontations with each other. However, conflict solutions are not decided in the Phi Gu on the basis of gender, but on the basis of the facts, actualities, and the truth at hand. Contrary to unjust earthly customs, however, the equal value of men and women is cultivated in the legal practice in the Phi Gu Association, and the female Phi Gu member is not discriminated against in any wise. Even in conflict situations, which Billy always keeps a watchful eye on and also advises on. Man and woman form an evolutionary community without any judgmental differences regarding better or worse, more important or less important, bigger or smaller. This is also the essential core of the spiritual teaching, creation energy teaching, the teaching of the earthly prophet of modern times, Billy Edward Albert Meier. This attitude also corresponds to the life and thinking manner of all members of the Phi Gu Association, even if much still needs to be learned in this respect. However, the female gender or the female Phi Gu members of the core group of the 49 or the passive group are not discriminated against or disregarded by all true Phi Gu members, neither in thinking nor in acting, but also not in any other wise, even if some interpersonal relationships once give cause for inconsistencies in behavior. If this occurs, then the necessary clarifying and unifying steps are taken to settle everything as quickly as possible, without actual quarrels arising from it, which would lead to real discord and irreconcilability. So it must be said, where there are human beings, there are always human problems. This cannot be avoided, because every human being is an individual with his or her own views, hopes, needs, wishes, and opinions. This is also the case in the Phi Gu, both with the female and male members. If it were not so, then it would be abnormal, and something would be wrong. Consequently, it is therefore unavoidable that problems and differing opinions also appear in the Phi Gu-E, which ultimately have to be solved by rationality and logic. It is then only a question of how these problems are solved and how the balance is restored. The equality of men and women, however, must not be equated with equalization. Men and women certainly have honorable differences in their thinking, in their feelings, and in their fine spiritual perceiving, as well as in their actions, deeds, and doings. However, These gender-specific differences must also be accorded the respect they deserve. Respectful regard, recognition and acknowledgement of existing differences between men and women are very important factors of the equality of both sexes. Thus, it is the supreme duty and task of the men and women of Figu, as it should be for all human beings on this planet and on other worlds, to become aware of this fact in order to learn from it the concerns about the equality of man and woman. Because the principle of equality is hidden in the creational nature of Omidam, to which all human life forms of the entire world space are subordinated. Many worlds are characterized by thousands of years of oppression of women by the majority of men. This attitude of domination over women has become deeply imprinted in the consciousness of the male world. Such aggressive impulses usually apply in minor forms, perhaps here and there also to those men who are a commendable exception. For this reason, it is also one of the supreme duties of the male members in the Figu Association to become aware of these possible and long-established false thoughts on a daily basis and to transform them into lived equality and equal rights in accordance with Billy's teaching, which is also the teaching of the Figu. Likewise, it is the duty of all women to become aware of this age-old fact of the suppression of their gender. In millennia of tradition of oppression, many women have become sufferers of their oppression and their supposedly unchangeable fate, which is why in modern times they must first relearn their independence, their self-confidence, and their female right, and become aware again of the equal value and equality of their gender vis-à-vis men. It is an important and great task of the female Figu members to communicate these concerns to their female gender comrades worldwide. In the Figu Association, the learning and implementation of equality and equal rights are applied by the members, on the one hand, through self-knowledge, personal search and research, and on the other hand, through the help of the Prophet Billy Edgeworth Albert Meier in everyday life to the best of their ability and knowledge, even if this does not work to the full extent here and there and still needs Billy's instruction. With a good conscience, however, it can be said that the whole thing is slowly but surely taking on better and better forms, and that equality and equal rights as well as the equal value of women in the Figu Association is actually finding a healthy realization. Each member of Figu has one electoral vote, regardless of whether they are a female or a male member. The views and opinions of the members are not put on the scale of gender. Any proposals, advice, indications or questions of any kind will be treated equally and will therefore be equally taken into account in the business and negotiations of the Figu. The equal value and equal rights of male and female members do not have to be explicitly discussed as a special issue in the Figu, because they are undisputed and are naturally taken for granted. However, the equality of the sexes is not the same as equality with regard to natural differences between men and women, which naturally cannot be changed. There are, for example, gender-specific rights and entitlements that are naturally reserved for one sex or the other. Women have the specific right to bear offspring, while the male part is normally responsible for the procreation of life. The division of roles for work within the Figu is not so much based on the gender of the member, but rather on the respective ability, skills, knowledge, and capacity for the tasks to be done. It is obvious that the female members are not called upon for the heaviest physical tasks, such as lifting loads, etc., which could endanger their health. There is no menial work for women in the Figu because the work of each individual female member is equally valued and appreciated as that of the male Figu members. Doing a job is a necessary part of the whole being of Figu. Every female member is also free to undertake. Heavy work if she is able to do so on the basis of her physical constitution and wishes to carry out such work of her own free will. Conversely, the men of the Figu are not too shy to do all the work in the household, because men also do the necessary work in the household, just as women do. This applies to cooking as well as washing up and general cleaning work, etc. As far as rights and duties are concerned, no distinction is made between men and women when they become members of the free community of interests. The female members of the core group of the 49 are placed on an equal footing with the same duties as men, such as Sunday duties, working days, meditations, cleaning duties, correction work, kitchen duties, visitor duties, or night watch, etc. The spiritual teaching, creation energy teaching, is genderless and neutral. It is therefore neither male nor female. Access to the Figu Association is open to every female as well as every male life form, as long as he or she fulfills the necessary requirements according to the Figu statutes. The teaching or the knowledge and wisdom of the spiritual teaching are accessible to women in exactly the same and unchanged form as to men. The same applies to the women or men of foreign planets who are interested in the spiritual teaching, creation energy teaching, if the teaching is taught on foreign worlds. The equality of men and women is a creational recommendation. The teaching of the prophet of the modern times, Billy Edward Albert Meier, finds its way out of theory into the reality of everyday life through the Figu Association. It is up to the open-minded and understanding human beings not to throw the shining pearls and high values of the equal value and equality of man and woman before the swine. The spiritual teaching, creation energy teaching, is based on the perfect freedom, peace, harmony, love, and self-responsibility of human beings. The freedom, self-responsibility, and self-duty fulfillment include respect and reverence for all life. This respect refers to all life forms of the entire world space and is also shown in the respect for the equality of the sexes. The members of the Figu Association are confronted with the spiritual teaching, creation energy teaching, on a daily basis, be it through correctional or everyday work in the center, or through the personal teaching and conversations with Billy, the prophet of the modern age. The work and commitment of the female members in the Figu Association are nevertheless respected and highly valued, just like the work and commitment of the male members. The association can only fulfill its mission and mandate as a unity of positive and negative. Therefore, the unrestricted and respectful cooperation among the members of different genders is of great importance for the common achievement of goals. The equality of the sexes, that is to say, of men and women, must be translated into reality by all Figu members on a daily basis and must grow more and more in the consciousness of each individual. But this also applies to all human beings on the earth. Otherwise, even the high teaching of the modern prophet will again deteriorate into a farce and ultimately lose its value as pure theory in cult religious and sectarian heresies. Therefore, the members of Figu put all their efforts into the realization and everyday implementation of these important concerns of equal rights and equal value of its female and male members. Men and women of all worlds and planets of the entire world space can only survive as an equal community in peace, harmony, and love. And the valuable and great work of Figu can only bear good and valuable fruit one day if the female and male members work together in equality and equivalence and respect each other in equality. Everything must be as Billy teaches and is exemplified in the Figu Association and described in the instructive scripture O.M. in Canon 32, verse 2200. 1,000 men may prepare a camp, but to make a home, it needs the women.
The Position of Women in the Figu by Bridget Keller, Switzerland.
Macho-like behavior, arrogance towards the female sex, not wanting to soil oneself with inferior women's work, reducing women to their sexuality, thinking that they can rule over them, regarding them as personal property, and generally attesting to their stupidity. Such things are no longer present here in the Figu. This does not mean that our men are all dream men. Like us female beings, they are also human beings with minor or major deficiencies, which it is still up to them, like us, to remedy. So even here in the Figu, there are still rare specimens whose thoughts are sometimes boorish and which express themselves in such words and actions. There are some who display a touch of impudence in order to appear more important to others. Laziness appears in individual cases, and there is also occasionally insistence on being right and arrogance. Not all of these attributes are limited to men. So much in advance, so as not to give the impression that we are a collection of wonder boys and wonder girls. The large proportion of our Figu men live a healthy thinking towards life and equality. It is characterized by decency, respect, cleanliness, and chivalry. If one considers that a neutral spirit form is resident in all of us, which can inhabit an opposite sex body in the next or a following incarnation, regardless of our present sex, then this seems logical and reasonable. Also, we are all encouraged to think and act independently, autonomously, and with personal responsibility. All of us who belong to Figu are instructed in the spiritual teaching, creation energy teaching, and therefore we have been able to work out the realization that man and woman are meant by creation to be in absolute equality. Equality is not, however, identical with equality or egalitarianism, for there are many serious differences between the sexes which ensure that one sex can and should complement the other in all areas of life. Not only the physical constitution, but also the male and female psyche, and consequently the thoughts, are in large parts of a different nature. This is quite decisive to know, because if a man assumes that the woman feels and thinks like him, then he will be badly disappointed, and it is the same the other way round. Partly due to thousands of years of oppression of women, but also partly due to the different abilities given by nature, such as genetic and hormonal control, the consciousness-based and manual abilities of the sexes differ, which is also often reflected in the choice of profession. Women are, by their nature, more sensitive, more balanced, more loving, and more motherly. She is able to create home and atmosphere and have a soothing effect on the male psyche. The man is by his nature physically stronger, more aggressive, more libidinous, more rational, and physically able to protect the woman. Through the teachings presented to us by Billy, and above all through his daily example, a spirit has developed among us at Hinterschmidruti over all these years that is born of mutual respect and decency. By empathetic understanding, clean, open speech, and a spontaneous, honest willingness to help. Love is a big word, but also love, rudimentary, or already a little more concrete, often makes one happy in the interpersonal sphere. I am not talking about love as partners. Of course, there is that too. Various group members have come together to form good communities. Another aspect of our life together in the group that is worth mentioning is our often good, profound or also funny and light-hearted hours that we spend after work, learning, discussing, or joking, without any innuendos causing embarrassment or unpleasant situations. To illustrate our life together a bit more, here are 2 episodes that happened. One Saturday, I was assigned to cook. I had already prepared the ingredients for the planned lunch when my father called to tell me that my mother was in a worrying condition. It was clear that nothing would come of the cooking today because a call for help from one's aged parents had priority. Spontaneously, and without fuss, Atlant, who had just finished his breakfast and was therefore still in the kitchen, offered to cook for me and take over my kitchen duties. I thought that was just amazingly sweet of him. He certainly had other ideas of how to spend the day. A week later, first weekend, 34 people at the table in our little kitchen. Philia, who usually cooks with me, was ill, and out of an unintentional omission, no full-day replacement was appointed for her. However, instead of being almost knotted up in work, I was given so much help that day, first and foremost by Freddie and Ava, but others who could spare time also pitched in, that I had less stress than usual on a first Saturday in the kitchen. What is also important for me to add at this point is the following. About 2 years ago, with Billy's and the group's agreement, and with Patah's and Ketzel's blessing, I was released from all Sunday duties and the night watch because my private situation was so precarious that a way had to be found for a special arrangement. Since then, this has meant for every single member to take over my share of the services. This is no easy task because these services are not primarily for our pleasure. Who likes to get up in the middle of the night to do guard duty and crawl out of bed early on Sunday morning? Not a single member of our group has ever said a word about this to me. Since we are often accused by outsiders of being a sect, I have to ask, in which sect would such tolerance be lived? For me, this selfless kindness is unique and priceless. To come back to the kitchen work of the men in question, one might think, yes, such a man likes to be in the kitchen for a few hours. A bit of courting between the cooking pots is quite nice. But even if our men are normal men and responsive to female charms, the willingness to help has nothing to do with that. It is a given, regardless of the person who spontaneously needs help. Apart from such assignments, we have divided our work according to physical strength and abilities. Each of us knows what he or she has to do. The men take on the heavier work in the house and yard, in the forest, and in the field. The computer and other specialists ensure that everything runs smoothly there, as do the various women who specialize in this. The preparation of the writings occupies an important space with us. Billy stands lonely at the top in the tireless writing of new books. With a few exceptions who are also eager to write, the rest of us members do our best to crumble in an article now and then. Both sexes are represented at the proofreading sessions on 2 evenings a week, although not in large numbers. The work in the print shop is also done by men. We women take care of the physical well-being of the residents. Group members and guests, though there are also men who cook, we keep the house and garden in order and ensure a mostly harmonious living environment. But we must not forget that Billy is the center of our household. He is the soul, the heart, the home port, the gentle, modest, affectionate, straightforward, and, when necessary, thunderous housefather who holds everything together and is there for us day and night in his immeasurable patience, instructing and advising us in an exemplary manner. To ensure that our organization runs smoothly at all times, the nights and Sundays and holidays are also in firm and safe hands, as already mentioned above. At night, night guards always patrol the grounds and the house. 2 in number per night, male or female. On Sundays and holidays, 3 members are present at the center throughout the day, keeping the house and yard tidy and clean, preparing meals for the rest of us, and taking care of the visitors who come to visit us. These Sunday services are indicative of our good teamwork and the mutual helpfulness of men and women. Cleaning, cooking, washing up, looking after visitors. Everyone is equally involved in all the activities. That is absolutely normal. And these hours spent together also promote cohesion and a good atmosphere among each other immensely. But this does not rule out the occasional spat and 2 or 3 getting up against each other. Arguing also has to be learned and promotes independence and teaches us to maintain decency and respect for our neighbor even in critical situations. We in the Phi-Gu have a role model function which we strive to live up to every day, because as Jeremias Gotthelf said in ancient times, what is to shine in the fatherland must begin in the home. And not only in the fatherland, but in the whole beautiful earthly world, a spirit shall one day reign that reflects that for which creation created all the prerequisites in us. A life in love, knowledge, harmony, peace, and wisdom, whereby also the disregard for the female sex, so long oppressed and trampled underfoot, will be a thing of the distant past.
The Position of Women in the Phi-Gu by Christina Gasser, Switzerland.
In principle, the statutes of the Phi-Gu state that men and women are equal and have equal rights without distinction. It is also stated in the Rules of Order, which were even drawn up by Simya Se, 1975, that all members, female or male, are equal and have equal rights. However, these rules also state that group members are to be divided into tasks and work according to their abilities, which has naturally or muscularly led to different work assignments for male and female members. Also in the Law of Love, in the Dodecalogue, in the Genesis, in the OM, and in many other books, all the basic rules that would facilitate human coexistence are actually laid out in the most detailed explanatory manner. They are regarded as a guideline and basis according to which every member of the Phi-Gu, whether man or woman, should orientate themselves to the best of their ability and establish a willingness to learn. However, the rule also applies that every human being must first and foremost look after himself or herself and, to a certain extent, investigate their own thoughts and actions within the framework of whether they are acting according to the best of their knowledge and conscience. Each person must work out love and neighborly love in himself or herself, up to and including universal love, for this may be demanded but cannot be forced or regulated. The members of Phi-Gu, women as well as men, are human beings with faults and weaknesses at very different levels of evolution, with more or less education, and their cultural backgrounds are also more or less different, and they would hardly have come together in this life had it not been for the task of the mission. Keeping them all together and guiding them is a very hard and difficult task that requires an incredible amount of patience and tolerance. Even Billy, who is more patient than any other human being on this earth, was driven into a physical breakdown by the abuses that prevailed in the early days, from which he has not been able to fully recover to this day. In the meantime, however, conditions have improved enormously in all areas but they are still not ideal, but still more oriented towards what is feasible at the moment than towards what is desired in the future. The few women who have found their way into the Figu could also not be more different in their origins, cultural background, and career. The biological fact that they are female human beings hardly seems to suffice to bring them into a common denominator, or to explain their position in Figu as one that is already perfect. Their social status as wife, life partner, girlfriend, mother, or single woman visibly differentiates them from each other in their needs and difficulties, as well as in their deployability for the mission. The distribution of work is not gendered male or female, but crisscrossed, and within the framework of being done according to need, desire, and ability. Furthermore, women in the Figu are subject to the same rights and duties as men, whereby they are absolutely equally qualified and equally valued in all decision-making, in speaking out and offering good ideas, etc., without distinction. Equality of rights and equal value with regard to men and women is regarded in the Figu as the highest recommendation and as an irrevocable rule without exception. This also means that the interpersonal relationships between the female and male members of the group correspond to a framework that is difficult to find outside the Figu, which is why many outsiders wonder why everything in the Figu works really well, and why both men and women can work and live together in a very good wise. Well, of course, all that glitters is not always gold, because both the women and the men of the Figu are only simple human beings. Which is why there can also be differences of opinion once in a while, but these are then very quickly settled again, and in a rational kind and wise. In this respect too, all Figu members are very willing to learn, which means that abuses are becoming rarer and rarer. Certain developments simply take time. And if here and there both male and female Figu members fall back into old behavior patterns, into old and actually already outdated patterns that have entrenched themselves in human consciousness over the last millennia, then these will eventually be settled again through good sense, even if it sometimes takes time. The struggle for women's equality, as led in recent years by certain emancipatory forces in Switzerland, has led to exactly what Billy predicted. It has turned out to be a counterproductive endeavor that has only aroused counterforces and led to a still increasing deterioration of the situation, especially for working women. The recognition of women as equal human beings must arise naturally, as in the Figu, from progressive evolution, that is to say, without coercion. Although it is forbidden by law in Switzerland to discriminate against someone on the basis of their gender, the position of women in society outside the Figu has hardly improved in any significant wise. Just as a racist will not allow himself or herself to be forbidden from having, expressing or secretly cultivating racist views, a man will also not allow himself to be forced from the outside, and certainly not by women, to reconsider or change his attitude towards them. Pressure creates counter-pressure and ultimately leads to a hardening of the fronts. Forced or dictatorially brought about changes have never contributed to a consciousness-based development. The former GDR, German Democratic Republic, may serve as an example here, after whose dissolution the suppressed forces of a racist nature, for example, fully broke through again. If the younger male members of the Figu are observed, it can be seen that certain rigid divisions into male and female tasks have become detached and intermixed. The Figu men are not afraid to engage in work that has traditionally been assigned to women, and are also not afraid of losing their masculinity as a result. Because it is not a division of roles in itself, rightly or wrongly in some respects. That is discriminatory. But when it is contemptuously downgraded and declared unworthy of a man. Apart from practicing and developing tolerance and patience, and perhaps also an occasional wait and drink tea, wait and see attitude, every Figu member, male or female, still has enough things left to work through in front of their own hut. But the time will not be long before the transformations of the new era, which begin to emerge steadily more and more.
The Position of Women in the Figu by Barbara Harnisch, Karen Wortland, Andrea Grassel, and Günter Neugebauer.
As a small community in the great multitude of human life forms of our home world Earth, the members of the Figu, and especially of the core group, are all the more dependent on each other the longer they live. Like a ship that navigates around the cliffs, defying the waves and the storm, this connection between all of them leads to an ever-growing and ever-stronger bond that connects everything. The idiosyncrasies and unkindnesses of one, combined with the helpfulness and friendship of the other, have formed a thick, connecting rope out of a thread. Thus, every single member, man or woman, has their tasks, obligations and rights with us, into which each individual, the longer they are with Figu, fits in and takes their place all the more. Even if one sometimes takes longer and the other sometimes less time. Overall, each individual is valuable for the community, often more than individual members who take longer to find their place and are dissatisfied because of this, would imagine. The position of the woman in the Figu is defined in such a manner that she is integrated into the rights and duties as they are given by the creational natural laws and recommendations, and by the spiritual teaching, creation energy teaching, that is imparted to us by Billy. This means that all members of the core group, male or female, are accepted first and foremost as human beings. The woman is equal to the man in every respect in Figu. Her work, her rights and duties, her opinions, views and her words carry as much weight as those of the man. The woman is respected as a human being and not oppressed by the man, as is unfortunately very often the case in everyday life today. In the Figu, women learn that they are worth more and that they are good for more than just being a house mom at the stove, which is not meant derogatorily, on the contrary. Women have very different tasks in life than men, and in the Figu people come back to their naturalness, as if by themselves. Men basically do the rougher, physically demanding work, while women are more responsible for the finer tasks. However, every woman and every man is free to choose which work he or she wants to do, in addition to the generally defined duties and work. It goes without say that the woman tends to do the housework and the man the heavier forest and field work. But this has nothing to do with the fact that the woman only belongs in the house and at the hearth, as many male, but also female, are of the opinion. If the woman wishes, she can also help with heavier work, but this is at her own discretion. In the Figu, absolute voluntariness prevails, and each woman and man takes on various duties on their own responsibility and voluntarily, which then, however, brings with it a specifically imposed inner obligation that is also borne by each individual. It is peculiar to the woman that she is the unifying and mediating element that ensures that a group is balanced. Through her rather peaceful and respectful nature, she tries to mediate conflicts and disputes. She takes on the role of carer, listener, mediator, etc. The woman tries to create harmony and peace. Wrong thinking about one's own female role in society is corrected over the years. On the one hand by the attitude of all core group members and the globally unique neutral human organization of Figu, and on the other hand by truth-finding thinking on the part of the woman herself, who has to free herself from religious, educational, and cultural biases in order to accept herself as a full, equal being. Gender equality in Figu has become as natural as breathing in and breathing out. The right attitude towards equality and equal rights for men and women, as it is practiced and lived in Figu, is a years-long process that has to be worked out by each individual group member himself. Billy shows us all how people should behave towards each other. Through the manner in which Billy leads the Figu and the manner in which he deals with everyone, one can see how living together and working together in a group should be regulated and proceed. Through his calm and, if necessary, determined manner, which is always fair and appropriate to the situation, one can see how much love, patience, knowledge and ability he has for his fellow human beings. Experiencing this ourselves and learning from it is a great gift for us core group members, which we can then, when we recognize it and apply it ourselves, also carry out so that other people can benefit from it.
On the Position of Women in the Figu by Bernadette Brand, Switzerland.
The position of women in the Figu cannot be considered or described without comparing it with the position of women today in the society of our Western world, or even worldwide. If one looks at women of the present time, then lamentably, they are still in all too many countries and areas of our earth nothing more than a kind of second-class human being. If they are assigned to the genus human beings at all, and are not simply the side vegetables of their husbands or their social environment, because of the manner of thinking, and because of their smaller physical strength, and especially because of their upbringing and the demands of their environment on their womanhood, they seem to be predestined for exploitation and abuse of all kinds. Even little girls are taught that they have to please those in their environment in order to be noticed. And this basic tenor of the demands placed on women does not change even when the girls grow up and finally become adults. Obedience, taciturnity, forbearance, docility, the willingness to help and serve others, and the self-evident demand that girls be accustomed to fulfilling duties at an early age, together with the requirement that women should always be beautiful, slim, young, well-groomed and willing, shape their path in life and their attitude from an early age. However, this very requirement harbors the secret background that women should be desirable to men at all times when they want to satisfy their open or secret desires. Whether the woman has her own opinion in this regard, and whether she wants to please the man or not, sadly, in the vast majority of cases, this does not play the slightest role, because as a woman one usually has to submit. Refusal can be fatal for women in today's world, not only directly but also figuratively and in every area of life. All too often, it is the rule that women are the exploited slaves of their environment, and it is not by chance that it is said, "It is hard to be a woman. One should think like a man, behave like a lady, look like a young, beautiful girl, and work like a horse." But thinking like a man is neither achievable nor desirable for women, because due to their fundamentally different construction and different tasks in life, women are usually much less aggressive and demanding in their thoughts and actions than men. Women who nevertheless try to do this very quickly become man-wives who have a repulsive effect on those in their environment and thoroughly damage the goals of their gender comrades. In the so-called civilized countries, the position of women is not fundamentally better than in the countries of the second and third worlds, even if here they are at least allowed to open their mouths and say something from time to time. But whether what is said is then also taken seriously and acted upon without the woman being considered rebellious, unladylike and notoriously nagging because of it remains to be seen. Wherever women work and live, it can be observed that, apart from very isolated exceptions, they are pushed back into the second or third row by the world of men and relegated to posts where the actual services for the maintenance of society have to be rendered, which usually involve hard and nerve-wracking work and have little or no social prestige. Openly or secretly, women are exploited and taken advantage of, and unfortunately, because of their attitude, mindset, and upbringing, they all too often put up with it. Men's so-called networking, sticking together, favoring each other, and protecting each other from effective or perceived attacks, is largely alien to women because they do not necessarily see every male or female competitor as an attacker on their own position. The so-called mare biting of women does not occur as often as men would like to see it, because women have mostly learned that they can only protect themselves to some extent from even more exploitation through mutual support, help, and cooperation. Higher and higher today is the percentage of working women, but they are also the first to be fired and put on the street when businesses are threatened by economic collapses. In all parts of the world, the old saying still holds true that women belong primarily at the hearth and have to keep house and home in order. And this task is incumbent on them even when they are employed outside the home, and all too often have to do harder work than most men. As a rule, the man comes home completely exhausted from his hard 8-hour day and the obligatory after-work beer and needs a thorough rest and regeneration, which he usually finds on the sofa or in an armchair with his feet on the table watching sports on TV, while the woman, after her 8-hour day at work, quite naturally has to find her rest and regeneration in looking after the household, caring for the children, and looking after her spouse. These all too familiar external symptoms of today's society find their reasons in the different manners of thinking of men and women. The standards are set by men, who are generally more aggressive and demanding in their approach to life than women, whose manner of thinking is more oriented towards preservation, protection, and guarding. The power to determine the rules is clearly in the hands of the men, who also do not allow the reins to be taken out of their hands, or only very rarely, and who do not want to give women any responsibility or a say in the so-called big decisions, but are only too happy to burden them with every other and especially every unloved responsibility. Only very few women succeed in storming men's bastions and gaining positions of power equal to or similar to those held by men. On the way, however, women pay an incomparably higher price than men, because as a rule, they not only have to deny their womanhood to the point of self-sacrifice, but they also have to adapt their behavior, thoughts, and actions to those of men, and thus lose an important, if not the most important part of their womanhood. It is often the case that they have to forego things for the sake of their careers, in which they could live out their femininity and pursue their real inclinations. All too often, such women are forced, consciously or unconsciously, to build and lead an illusory life that has nothing whatsoever to do with the aspirations and urges of their true inner being and their individual, actual inclinations. That this discrepancy then also affects their views, their character, and their whole life and being and their inner well-being, that is inevitably obvious. Such women are usually set on their path by a wide variety of motivations, and not infrequently it is the desire to be able to achieve something positive and progressive for women in general. Unfortunately, however, the path they have to follow and the goal they have to achieve are so atypical of the mindset and mentality of women as such that they either lose sight of their goal or adapt it to the mindset and desires of the male world and thus become untrustworthy. Unfortunately, in today's world, women's kind and wise of thinking is still considered secondary, not to be taken seriously and unmeasurable, and it hardly occurs to any man that women's position and manner of looking at the world and society could be a fundamentally important and absolutely indispensable contribution to the shaping of society and its progress. It is true that men in the so-called industrialized countries talk about equal rights and equality for women in mountains of empty straw, and of course every so-called constitutional state has corresponding laws, but these are scandalously neither implemented in an appropriate form, let alone enforced. Fundamentally, the position of women in today's society on our Earth, with rare isolated exceptions where good beginnings exist, has changed little to nothing. Only the cloak under which disregard, exploitation, and abuse of women are hidden has become more respectable and pleasing. If one compares the position of women in the Figu with the prevailing conditions, then one finds an extremely comfortable and humane position of femininity in the community. Of course, also in the Figu-e, women have to fulfill those tasks and duties in terms of work which are assigned to them by nature as women, such as taking care of their household and looking after the children. But also in these typical tasks for women, men stand by them as equal partners with equal obligations and support them to the best of their ability if necessary or desired. This also means that women are relieved of work that is physically too demanding for them or cannot be expected of them in terms of their strength, although women's willingness, ability, and readiness to perform are taken into account or included in the requirements. Thus it is up to each woman to decide for herself what she is willing to do beyond her daily duties and what she occupies herself with in a self-chosen, voluntary commitment. In doing so, she can give free rein to her inclinations and engage in any trade that suits her and interests her, even if her passion and interest should be in purely men's matters. The women of the Figu are not denied any activity if it does not overtax their strength, and even in such areas, they are entitled to the assistance and support of the men if they reach the limits of what is feasible and bearable for them, without the responsibility or the task being taken out of their hands. "You are too weak for that," or "that is a man's job," are words that the women of the Figu do not hear, or only very rarely, because if they are interested, they can test out for themselves whether their strength is sufficient or whether they are man enough for a certain task. On the other hand, women are also not given or saddled with tasks or duties that they cannot fulfill or carry, that are repugnant to them or that would even humiliate them as human beings or as women. Women's attitudes of cooperation, preservation, and protection, which are all too readily exploited and taken advantage of in the normal and customary world of work and society, are respected and valued in Figu. This kind of equality and equal rights for women in Figu does not, of course, only apply to the work that is done and has to be done. They are only a good example to illustrate the position of women in the social fabric of Figu. The position of women in the Figu is probably most conspicuous in those situations where it is a question of freely expressing one's own opinion or taking joint decisions. Even in purely male domains, the word of women is heard and accepted as an equal expression by all participants and considered if the contribution is relevant and expert. If the women's objections are not understandable or comprehensible to the participating men, they are not simply wiped off the table as not worthy of consideration, but rather it is neutrally questioned why the woman has come to the conclusion she has presented, or from which insight or opinion she is arguing. In all cases, however, a woman's word counts as much as a man's, and it weighs just as heavily or lightly. It would not seriously occur to any Figu man to dismiss a woman's decisive utterance as women's talk, and it would not sit well with him, even if such women's talk honestly exists, of course, though not in situations where a serious utterance is called for or appropriate. But not only in purely male matters does the word of the woman weigh the same as that of the man. Also in interpersonal and in all other areas, the words of women are heard and receive their attention, which also applies to the wishes of women. Living together in the Figu is organized and oriented in such a wise that each person helps the other in all matters and provides them with relief when this is within their possibilities and within their sphere of influence. This relief and assistance always takes place in the area in which the person concerned has his or her strengths or possibilities, whereby it is also always guaranteed that something new can be learned. This manner of living together often makes great demands on the voluntariness of those involved and is often a hard test of patience for those who are more willing to work hard and are more committed. But it has proven its worth over the current period of almost 30 years. In retrospect, it can be stated with justification that the Figu form of society offers the greatest possible justice for men and women in our world and at our time, because the strengths of the weak are spared and those of the strong are challenged, but without degenerating into exploitation or overtaxing of one side or the other, because everyone can determine their own burdens and obligations, regardless of whether it is a woman or a man. In the Figu, the woman is not forced to think like a man, to imitate or copy him in any wise. She can and may be completely herself, live out her needs, her interests, and her inner striving, and realize herself in the best sense of the word. She does not need to take into consideration false social norms and behavior. As long as she remains humane in her behavior and maintains that decency which enables and guarantees the harmonious coexistence of human beings. This is especially true in that delicate area of expressions and testimonies of affection that do not fall within the framework of marriage, intimate friendship or civil partnership, but are based on pure friendship and companionship. It is precisely in the interpersonal sphere that the advice and opinion of the women in the Figu is sought after and often enough highly valued. Not infrequently, the women of the Figu have set things in motion or initiated things with regard to the mission that would never have occurred to the men. Since women naturally have their greater strength and competence in the social and interhuman sphere, it is precisely in this relationship that they have been able to create and conquer a position that is an important support and an indispensable basis of Figu, the possibilities of self-realization and of living one's own inclinations and needs are completely unlimited for the women of Figu, and they are in no wise restricted by standards, limits, or regulations imposed on them. They are determined solely by the will, the interests, and the inclinations of the women who are able to act, to manage, and to govern over things according to their own will, and in complete self-responsibility and autonomy, respected, considered, and supported by the men at all times. The women of the Figu have absolutely the same possibilities for autarchical, independent thinking and acting, managing and governing over things as the men, who do not have to interfere in any of the women's concerns, and as a rule, do not do so. Like the men, the women in the Figu are also entitled to have not only their manner, their thinking and their words taken seriously, respected, and appreciated, but also what is particularly important for women, their feelings. If the Figu women's feelings are hurt, they have the opportunity to defend themselves effectively and put the aggressors in their place. They do not have to suffer in silence and do not have to acquiesce to any kind of abuse or attack and, at worst, allow themselves to be exploited or even abused, as happens to other women, but they have the most diverse possibilities to defend themselves, either verbally, which is definitely a good way, because the statements and expressions of will of the women in Figu are taken seriously and respected, or by coming out and seeking support, which is also granted to them if it is justified. First and foremost, women in the Figu are considered human beings who are and must also be considered respected, regarded, and treated as such, which makes them equal partners and equal Figu members whose expressions of will and needs cannot or must not be ignored, ridiculed, or subordinated to the needs of men. In the Figu Dalai, a woman is allowed to be herself and to live without having to take into account the demands or requests of the male world, or to submit to its rules and laws. In the Figu, it is ability alone and not gender that decides the position or tasks of a member, and not the expectations placed on men or women. So it is only natural that the rules and the guidelines that govern Figu were not drawn up by the men alone, but that with a few exceptions that are purely mission-related, they were drawn up and established by all together, with the experiences and contributions of the women weighing and balancing as heavily as those of the men. The Figu as it is today is the joint work of women and men who have learned and are still learning to make resolutions, to implement them, and also to live them in a manner that is equitable, on equal terms, and equally valued. The present comfortable, not to say unique for this world, position of women in the Figu is unthinkable without the teaching and example of Billy. With his example and his manner of respecting women, treating them as fully valued, equitable, on equal terms, and as valuable members to be taken seriously, and with his assertiveness, he has helped them to the position they deserve in Figu, through his manner of seeing and treating all human beings, whether men or women, as equal and on an equal footing. He has exemplified and will hopefully continue to exemplify for a long time to come what needs to be learned for both sexes. It is self-evident that not only men, but also women in particular, had to be and still have to be tirelessly instructed and often reprimanded if one has grown up and been brought up in today's understanding of the roles of men and women. It is not only women who have to emancipate themselves, that is to say, to become self-responsible, cognizant of self-duty and self-reliant, but also men. Neither the man's image of women nor the woman's image of men is in order in today's world and corresponds to the natural laws, because it is not acceptable that one gender judges the other as inferior, not to be taken seriously, dependent, or as obsessed with power, macho, and sex. Both sexes must let go of their false views and misguided opinions of the opposite sex and find ways to see, accept, respect, and appreciate the opposite sex with all its needs and desires, with its strengths and weaknesses, as what it is in truth, namely not only an independent, self-responsible and self-reliant part of a harmonious partnership in society, but also as a self-reliant and self-evolving and progressive life form belonging to the opposite sex. Through his wise teachings and manifold profound explanations in all possible concerns and divisions of human life, Billy has shown the way to true humanity. The fact that his extraordinarily impressive understanding of the female psyche and female manners of thinking also play a decisive and fundamental role in this set of issues is not only a prerequisite for his mission to teach human beings how human beings should live their lives, but it also results from his own authoritative attitude as a man towards women. Without Billy's support and his wise counsels, the women in the Figu would never have been able to reach and occupy their present position as equitable and equally valued, considered, and respected partners. Of course, the members of the Figu are also only normal Earth human beings who often cannot live or live their partnerships perfectly or adequately for many reasons. But the goal to be reached is clearly in front of everyone's eyes and is aimed at and striven for by everyone to the best of their knowledge and conscience, and according to their given powers. Certainly, our members are still often guided by selfish motives and wrong motives, which burdens our partnerships just as the partnerships of other human beings are also burdened, who have not been taught by Figu and who do not strive for the correctness of their thinking and acting according to the laws of nature. The members of Figu are not an elite, but simply learners on the evolutionary path to truth, and as such they must struggle to think and act correctly in every respect just as much as all other human beings. There is not one among us, man or woman, who does not now and then, more rarely or more often, get in his or her own way and go astray. This can then have a negative effect on the image of women among men, as well as on the image of men among women, and lead to more or less major distortions in the coexistence of Figu members. The bottom line, however, is that the members are on a good and evolving path, and that the behavior of men and women has changed and improved in the years since the founding of the Figu in such a manner that the position of women in the Figu can become an example for all forms of society on the earth in the future.